Hello, and welcome to the ALCTS webinar on Library Project Management 101. This will serve as Session 1 in our two-part virtual pre-conference on this topic. I'm Erin Elsie, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Our presenter today is Lisa Jenkins. Lisa is Deputy Chair of the SILIP Information Literacy Group and was involved with the LILAC conference for 9 years. She has 15 years experience working in libraries and is now self-employed. Lisa specializes in providing dynamic and interactive training and facilitation for information professionals from across the UK. She has trained staff from the British Library, the Bodleian Libraries at Oxford University, the University of Nottingham, the University of Manchester, and Lancaster University, amongst others. Lisa trains on a wide range of subjects, including negotiating and influencing, project management, team building, moving into management, and training the trainer. She brings much expertise to today's topic, and we're fortunate to have Lisa with us. A few logistics for today's presentation. All attendees are muted to prevent background noise, and we do not have interactive chat capabilities. You may, however, comment on today's presentation using Twitter. The hashtag is ALCTS19, which you can also see up there in the top left of your screen. We do not monitor the Twitter feed, so if you have questions for our presenters, please type them into the question box on your GoToPanel webinar screen. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation, but you can enter your question at any time throughout the webinar. If we do not get to your question, our presenters kindly agreed to answer remaining questions in writing, which will be sent out to all attendees. This webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive an email with links to the recording and presentation slides shortly after the webinar concludes. And now I'll turn it over to Lisa. Note there will be a slight delay as we change presenters.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Erin. Thanks for that lovely introduction. As Erin said, my name's Lisa, and I'm the Deputy Chair of the SILIP Information Literacy Group, and I'm also a Fellow of my UK Library Association. I've been a freelance trainer since 2012, and as you can probably tell, I am from the UK and I live in Manchester in the northwest of England. As Erin was saying, I spend my time training library staff on various different topics, including project management. I've worked in different libraries, university libraries, college libraries, and an NGO library. And I'm delighted to be part of the ALCTS pre-conference. So today, it's an introduction to project management, and I'm going to be talking about the basics. So how do you go about starting, and what sort of things do you need to think about when you're thinking about project management? So, as a reminder for you guys and for myself, the learning outcomes today are that I'm hoping by the end of the session you'll be able to describe what a project is and recognise different sorts of projects. We'll be having a look at the life cycle of projects and thinking about different project management methods. I'm also going to be having a bit of a think about some of the jargon that we might use when we're talking about project management. Sort of a jargon buster is going to be at the end of today, if that's okay. So let's start. What essentially are we talking about when we're thinking about a project? Obviously, I had a bit of a research and I found some definitions that I liked. So the first definition that I found was from the Association for Project Management. Now, this is a UK organisation, but it's very similar to the US Project Management Institute. I liked this one because it actually shows why project management is different to ordinary management. So it's talking about the fact that a project's unique, it's a temporary endeavour, undertaken to achieve planned objectives, which could be defined in terms of outputs, outcomes, or benefits. A project is usually deemed to be a success if it achieves the objectives according to their acceptance criteria, with an agreed timescale and a budget. A key factor that distinguishes project management from just management is that it has a final deliverable and a finite time span, unlike management, which is obviously continuous. The other definition that I found was actually from a project management software company, and they're a Spanish company and they're called Synapse. And I quite like the fact that this one talks very much about tasks, which I think is very key to project management. So Synapse says that a project is a planned set of interrelated and sometimes dependent tasks that must be executed over a certain period of time, taking into consideration costs, resources, and other limitations. The task must be completed in order to reach a specific goal. So in libraries, we're often talking about a set of aims, objectives, and tasks that will help us to introduce something new, that once implemented will then become part of our day-to-day business and routines. So business as usual, or BAU. Some of the things that I was thinking about, which were examples of projects, were, and I'm sure some of you will have been involved in some of these examples that I'm talking about. So it could be moving a library into a new space or building. It could be the merging of libraries, I know, or even different services. I know, having worked in many university libraries in the UK, sometimes we've had situations where the IT teams have been merged with the library teams. And I know as well, when I worked for an NGO library, we were about to merge the Equal Opportunities Commission, the Disability Rights Commission, and the Commission for Racial Equality Libraries. And before I did that, I rang around and I spoke to other similar organisations, librarians, who had merged those libraries, to pick their brains about what I could expect. I know one person did suggest to me that it was going to be a bit of a classification nightmare, and it did seem that it was going to be the case. Another example of a project that we would have in libraries is introducing a new library management system, digitising a collection, or implementing reading lists, or in fact anything where we're introducing new products or service that could be considered complex or simple projects. So, talking of the things I've just mentioned, I just mentioned simple or complex projects, and it might be pretty obvious to say that we can categorise projects into those categories: simple, complex, or very complex. But I think it's actually useful to spend some time thinking about the sort of project you're working on, so that you can start to think about other ramifications for staffing and resources. So, for example, if it is a complicated project, how complicated is possible? Simple projects may well be those where you are the only person working on the project team. So you're the team member, you're the role of leader, manager, and worker. And I can imagine, if any of you in what in the UK we'd call solo librarian positions, then often the projects, you would be all of those roles at one time, simply because of the lack of staff and other resources. Another example of a simple project might well be recruiting members of staff. So you might be recruiting customer service advisors or something like that, something that would only involve one or two people and would only involve basic project management tools or techniques. And if we are thinking about the slightly more complicated projects, or complex projects as the category talks about there, if it's a large project and there are many project teams working on it, then organisation and responsibility needs to be incredibly clear. Those lines of authority and approval need to be very transparent, because we don't want people to get confused or having to wait for different people to get the go-ahead to do certain tasks. Also, in complicated projects, it might well be that teams are located in different regions, and so it might have to involve a very structured and formal approach. And the communication strategy will need to be carefully thought through, so that everybody's kept in the loop and everyone knows what they're doing. Another way of thinking about the types of projects we might be working on is thinking about whether it's a strategic project or an operational project. A strategic project would involve major changes which might be linked to a new organisational strategy or plan. Those are the types of projects that might take a few years to complete, and typically will involve management of change tools and techniques as well as project management knowledge. Anything where you've got changes in staffing or location can cause staff to worry about their job security. Any changes where people are worried about losing their job mean that emotions will be running high and productivity might be at risk. One of the other things I'd advise is then having a look, if that's the type of project that you're involved in, is having a look at some of the literature around those change processes, or even going on some training on how to help staff deal with change, because I think that would be really useful, and particularly for those that are new to project management as well. When we're talking about operational projects, this might well be located within a particular department or team, and might well have a relatively short timescale. Operational projects rarely involve the use of full-blown management of change approach. However, it's important to remember that both strategic and operational projects do require the development and implementation of really good communication strategies. In any situation, if colleagues and stakeholders are kept in the dark, then it's likely to lead to trouble. So let's start having a think about what kind of things are we thinking about when we're thinking about the step-by-step approach to project management, or in fact the project cycle. It might seem a little obvious, but in a very, very basic way, a project cycle is about starting the project, planning the project, implementing it, and then evaluating it and closing it. So let's have a look at those different areas a little bit more closely. Okay. I'm going to slow down a little bit if that's okay, because I'm hoping that everyone can hear us, but I know that people might well be having a few sound problems. So, when we're thinking about starting the project, what sort of things do we need to consider? Very simply, we need to think about, well, what are we trying to do? When will we start? What do we need? Can we do it alone, or do we need help? How long will it take? And how much will it cost? Once we've done those basic questions, we need to think about how we create a more formal statement where we can work out what our project aims, outcomes, and benefits are. How much money, staff, and time we have, and if we need any other equipment or other resources to complete the project. We also need to consider what our working practices should be, and what the potential risks and legal issues might be. We might even need to think about using a SWOT analysis. I don't know if anyone's come across SWOT before, but it's where we have a look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that might be around to the project that we're dealing with. And then we go on, after we've done the initial descriptions and the initial identifying of what we want to do, we have a think about planning. So, what we like to think about when we're planning the project is that we've broken our aims into our objectives, and we've broken our objectives into tasks. Those tasks can then be put into the project schedule, and they can often be displayed using a Gantt chart. And once we have those tasks as well, it's also the time that we have to allocate all the roles and responsibilities for those tasks. I know Gantt charts can be actually really useful. It's essentially, a Gantt chart is essentially a visual way of showing our schedule, often in bar charts. People can use Excel spreadsheets, or they can use project management software. But I know specifically in some of the examples of places that I've worked, where universities or other organisations have been putting together funding bids, they'll often be asked to supply a Gantt chart to show where those milestones and deliverables will occur, as well as the individual tasks in the general plan. And like I say, having a very visual task plan can be useful for you as well, to see if you have any interdependencies, Because occasionally I think sometimes we'll start planning the project, we'll list all of the tasks, and without realizing it, we've thought we've popped something at a different place, which actually could do with being a little bit earlier because there are other things dependent on that outcome. So those tasks then can be moved up and down the schedule as need be. And like I say, tomorrow when we discuss more around technology for project management, we'll think more about the different technologies that can be used with Gantt charts and with other aspects of project management. So, after planning our project, then we actually need to do it. We need to do the work, and we need to manage the staff and their workload. And it's one of the things that's quite interesting, I find, about project management is the differences between the technical aspects of the project management and the people side of things as well. And I think that's really, really key within the implementation part of the project management cycle. We've also got to ensure that we're reporting our progress, and often this will be with quite formal progress reports, because we need to ensure that our stakeholders and any project boards or project sponsors are fully up to date with where we're at, and also if there's any issues and problems that need to be resolved. We then have the final section in this particularly simplistic version of the project cycle, and that is the close and the evaluation. Obviously, with any work we do, particularly in libraries, I think measuring the impact and benefits of what we're doing is key. And I think that one of the really nice things about some of the projects we get involved in is that we can have the stats, we can have visitor numbers, we can have all sorts of different numeric impact measures, but we can also add a little bit of the story in as well and start thinking about, are there any anecdotal stories about the impact and benefits of what we've been doing, just so that we can flesh out some of that, some of those numbers a little bit more so they feel a little bit more realistic to people. But closing the project is really important. Obviously, we need to think about how it went. We need to think about the lessons learned. It's a very key thing for project management, and I think as librarians, I think we are pretty reflective people anyway. So we are quite well placed for this kind of task. But I think particularly with lessons learned, we need to think about future works and projects and seeing whether we can improve those with some of the things that we've learnt from the project, and also seeing if there's anything else that we need to add or include if we're doing projects in the future. We also need to celebrate the success of the project, and also thinking about, okay, well, the project is finished. How do we now go about including this as business as usual for the library service? So, I realise some of the things that we've been talking about might seem a little bit abstract, and now we're going to think about some different methodologies. The ones that I've chosen to talk to you about are, there's one US-based one, and there's one that started in the UK, but I know is now is often being used in conjunction with the US one. So I thought I'd go through these in a little bit more detail. Again, because this is an introduction, I'm not going to be able to go through lots and lots of things with you, but hopefully it will allow you to get a little bit of a sense of what sort of thing I'm talking about. Okay, so first project management methodology that I'm going to talk about is PMBOK, and this is essentially the project management body of knowledge, and this has been created by the Project Management Institute and is predominantly used in North America and Australia. One of the things that I think is quite interesting is that if we're thinking about simple projects, well, they might be led, managed and delivered by one person, and they might only be using quite simple tools, so possibly even just spreadsheets and emails. But if we're thinking about slightly more complicated and complex projects, then having project management methodologies is possibly a slightly more structured way of making sure we're covering all of our bases. So if we're thinking about PMBOK, essentially this is a body of knowledge. So if you have a look at the Project Management Institute website, you'll see they have an entire collection of knowledge there for you. Everything that's thought about as the general standards within the project management industry. The other thing I was going to say, I'm talking about PMBOK, Prince2 and Agile project management today. If you're thinking about getting heavily involved in project management, it might even be worth your while thinking about getting some sort of qualification or certification in any of these different tools. It could be worth having a look to see if there's anything in-house, depending on how large your organisation is. But I also know that both Prince2 and the Project Management Institute run their own certification. I've also found I found a MOOC online that's been written by the University of California at Irvine, and that's a Coursera course. And I know that they were talking about PMBOK. So again, that might be an option as well, depending on budgets and things like that. It's also quite a useful thing for your CV if you're then thinking about going for a project management role. So, Prince2, as you can see from the slide, is about projects in controlled environments. And agile project management is often used in software developments, anything that's really fast-paced. So let's go through these one by one. Okay, you can see with PMBOK that actually there are two sections to this particular methodology. There is the process groups, and then there are the 10 knowledge areas. Now, for me, when I was looking at both this and the one of the Prince2's, the methodologies, and I'll talk about that in a second, they both have two areas that align with the simple project management cycle we've just been through. So with PMBOK, it's about project initiating, planning, execution, monitoring and control, and then closing the project. Very, very similar to what we've just talked about. And then we have the 10 different knowledge areas, which are including that scope, stakeholders, risk, communications, and things like that. And I will go through those at the end when we start talking a little bit about some of those jargon and jargonistic terms. I'll also be talking about stakeholder management tomorrow as well, so that we will be talking about that in a bit more detail. But these are definitely things where in the US, these are seen as the guidelines that are accepted as the general standards for the project management industry. If we have a think about Prince2, and this is often used in the government sectors within the UK, because that's where it was actually designed to start with. Where PMBOK is definitely about knowledge, Prince2's more to do with a set of processes, but if you have a look, their 7 stages are also very similar to the simple project management cycle we looked at earlier. Starting, initiating, directing, controlling, and then managing the different products and stages, and then closing the project again. One of the things about Prince2 is it is a pretty formal process, and there's quite a lot of reporting and documentation involved in that. But some of the things that they're talking about basically is the processes that you work through, and it also talks about what information you need to gather on the way. So essentially we're thinking about organisation, and what they really want with a project in Prince2 is that it's organised and controlled from start, middle to end. Now, one of the things I was able to have a look at was some of the differences between Prince2 and PMBOK, and I thought it was really interesting, and I can totally see how these two methodologies could actually be used in conjunction. And that's because actually Prince2, you'd use that to answer questions such as what, when, and whom. And PMBOK answers the how. So if we're thinking about the different frameworks, then Prince2 is prescriptive and it's thinking about best practices in project environment. But then PMBOK is descriptive, and that's based on the knowledge areas such as scope, schedule, cost, and risk. And I can see how those would link really nicely together if you were thinking about really increasing your knowledge and experience of project management. So again, the other things that I was going to talk about, those differences. In Prince2, all of the different project roles are quite well defined, and PMBOK talks about the project manager's role and how they lead the process. The third methodology that I wanted to talk to you about was us thinking about Agile. And I thought this might be quite an interesting one as well, because I realised from when I worked in technical services myself quite a long time ago, obviously we've got library management systems and all sorts of different tools to help us in technical services. But one thing I've noticed is obviously the increase in software development that's being done in-house. So again, I thought this might be quite a useful thing to talk to you about. As you can see from the slide, we're talking about, previously we talked about methodologies that are pretty sequential, very much that 1, 2, 3 approach, ending in a big launch at the end. And Agile was designed to be more flexible than that. And in fact, it has an emphasis on people and communication rather than the processes and knowledge that the other two methodologies were having a look at. And interestingly, there was an entire Agile manifesto created, and that includes working directly with and satisfying customers. And they talk about breaking all the work down into very small chunks, meeting daily to ensure the work is on track, and being open to changes, even up to the very end of the process. So very much thinking about something that could work and adapt to problems and issues that are happening every day. This particular methodology has 4 core values, and they're talking about individuals and interactions as opposed to processes and tools. They want to create working software, and sometimes they want that much more than they want comprehensive documentation. They also want to involve customer collaboration very, very early on, because obviously they want people to use it and to find problems. And it's, again, I've said this before, it's about responding to change really quickly. And it all started because if you think about software bugs and glitches, well, then they have to be ironed out as the software is being developed, and not just at the end of the project. You know, if we thought about a sequential project management methodology such as Prince2, and we did everything very, very slowly and didn't wait in, and didn't test things as we were going along, there'd be a lot of time wasted, and actually when we launched it at the end, there might be all sorts of problems that we needed to fix. And Agile is basically designed for continuous testing. So, some of the things I wanted to talk to you a little bit about were the terminology that people think about when they're thinking about project management. And I think as well, some of the words that I've chosen specifically to have a look at you with today are particularly important to know, because they're sort of the things that are key in the development of a project. So I've mentioned this already, but the first piece of jargon that I was looking for or looking at was business as usual, because that's essentially what we need to do. We want to be able to do projects so we can innovate and we can introduce new services to our libraries, but we also want those to become part of our day-to-day operations, and that's what that BAU stands for. And I think you might have already heard BAU as a term previously, but people do use that as one of the final deliverables of projects a lot. We want this to become part of our routine. We've then got the business case, Now, I'm sure that many of you have to provide business cases for all sorts of different things to do with your libraries and your library work, but particularly for projects, it's the thing that provides justification for undertaking the project. It evaluates the benefit, cost and risk of alternative options and provides a rationale for the preferred solution. Contingency plans are incredibly important, and I think sometimes spending some time brainstorming and almost catastrophizing can be really, really helpful, because once you have thought of all of these different things that could possibly happen or different risks, then obviously you can think about alternatives and you can think about different courses of action, and you've already got those ready and as part of your plan. I also like the idea as part of a business case to think about the do nothing option. I'm also a coach actually, and sometimes when I'm dealing with people and I'm thinking about they're wanting to change, or they're wanting to change jobs or something like that I'm helping them with, I'll often ask them, well, what would happen if nothing changed? And this is what the do nothing option is about. And it's often part of the business case. And it's where you talk about the consequences of not doing the project. What happens if we don't get this sorted? We've then got the Gantt chart. The Gantt chart that we were talking about earlier. So again, useful for if you're doing funding bids or for as part of your documentation, but also incredibly key to making sure you can see that you're on track. We also have handover. And that's the point at which the deliverables, so all of the outcomes of the project, are given over to either the project sponsors or they're launched as services and products for your patrons. We talked about lessons learned earlier. So it's those reflections on the project work. They can be used as references and points of interest for future work. And it's that thinking about, well, what went well? What didn't go so well? What would we do if we were doing this again? What sort of things would we improve? We've got the all-important project plan. It's a document formally approved by the project manager, sponsor and other stakeholders. And it talks about the approved costs, the schedule and the scope baselines. It guides execution, the control and the quality and performance assessment of the project. So it's got all of those things in it where it's talking about the things that we need to monitor and measure. It also forms the basis for communication between the parties involved in the project. Project plans can vary in their levels of details depending on whether it's a simple project or a complex project. We've also got the project scope statement. The project scope statement is about what the project's meant to achieve and describes the deliverables expected. It also talks about what we're not doing, and I think that's really key when you're thinking about your scope. You need to think about what you're not including, because scope can really easily get away from you, and that's something we'll talk about in a couple of terms' time. But it is really key to have that scope statement, looking at what you're meant to achieve and what your deliverables are. And it talks about the measurable objectives so that you can see how you're going to assess the success of your project. We've then got a project sponsor. Now, in many organisations, many libraries, this could be your direct line manager, or it could even be the director of your library service. But it's the person who has ultimate authority over the project. They're the ones that provide high-level direction, they approve the funding, and they well as think about any kind of deviations from cost and budget that might occur due to unforeseen circumstances. But they also think about the scope I was talking about before. You know, how far are we going? What sort of things are we including? What are we not covering? They're also the people that make sure the project delivers its objectives. The other thing to think about, again, I know this is part of contingency planning as well, but it's analysing the risk. Analysing the risk is the first part of your contingency planning, because you need to think about what sort of things could affect the project. Sometimes it could be to do with politics, particularly if you're in a government-funded organisation. If the party in power changes, does that mean that funding will change? Is that something that's going to be a problem? Is there anything else that's happening? You know, might there be issues? What happens if staff members go off sick or can't come to work for some reason? So it's thinking about all of the different things that could impinge or impede your project. So thinking about what kind of event might impact the achievement of your objectives can be really helpful when you're thinking about risk. A good tool to do that is SWOT, like I've said. Now, this is something I've done with lots of different groups, actually, when we've been thinking about setting up projects. And I simply use flip chart paper, and I have 4 different areas, and we brainstorm all of the strengths of the project. And that might be to do with innovation, creativity, the skills of the project team. Well, actually, it's a really good time to do this, depending on what's going on in the world or in your state. But then we can also think about the opposite. So what are the weaknesses? What might stop us? Do we have any experience or skills gaps? What sort of things do we need to think about with our weaknesses? And we've also got the chance to have a really good think about, well, what are the opportunities? Is there anything going on, either worldwide or countrywide, that might be an opportunity for us to market our project or to talk about our project in a wider arena? And then coming back to the threats, we can really think about those risks then. What might stop us? The other thing that I wanted, and I've mentioned already, but scope creep. So I've talked about project scope statements, and I've talked about making sure that you have one, but also just being aware of scope creep. And this is talking about those gradual changes that can occur in a project, but without formally getting them mentioned in project plans. But the reason that, particularly in project management terms, this is considered to be a bad thing, is if we've not planned for scope creep, there might be unapproved changes that might affect extra money, extra staffing, or in fact us getting our deliverables ready on time. So thinking about that schedule. We've also got scope management. So the process whereby our outputs, our outcomes, and our benefits are identified, defined, and controlled, hopefully. I suppose that's the very opposite of scope creep. We've also got stakeholder management. We're thinking about systematically identifying who they are, analysing and planning the work that we might need to do to engage and communicate with our stakeholders. Like I say, we are going to be talking about stakeholders tomorrow, but if you think about a small library service and who their stakeholders might be, some of the stakeholders are going to be library staff. Some of them are going to be the general public and your patrons, but there might also well be other organisations that might be interested as well. And we'll go through how you can think about them tomorrow. At the bottom, I've got two different work-oriented terminologies there. I've got work package and work stream. And I know that particularly, because I used to be involved in a couple of services that designed databases for university students. One was almost like a meta catalogue of library catalogues, and one was a meta catalogue of archive catalogues. And so the things that we talked about often, because we had library content, but we also had software engineers. We talked a lot about work packages and work streams. So work packages, for me, that's about related activities that are basically defined at the same level. So they might have equal weighting, is the sort of thing that I'm talking about there, when we've broken them down into tasks. And then we have work streams. Now, your entire project might well be one work stream, but also a very complex project might have more than one. So the work stream is the logically arranged series of activities that must be completed to pursue project objectives. So again, it sometimes depends on how simple or complex your project is as to how many work packages and how many work streams you might be operating with. Okay, so the other things that I've provided for you are a couple of glossaries to help you out as well, and I can't even tell you how large some of these are. I've really given you some of the ones that I think are some of the most important, but there are tons and tons and tons of things out there. And there's a lot of information on the web about project management. But that's some of the glossaries that I thought might be quite useful for you. The other thing that I've provided for you is my reference lists as well. So something from the Association of Project Managers, some books and some slides that I was given by Barbara Allen, who's written a great no-nonsense guide to project management. And I've also got my lists of images at the bottom there. Okay, that's everything that I've got for you today in terms of the content that's prepared. It'd be really lovely to see and to answer some questions. And again, if there isn't enough time for the amount of questions that we get, I'm very happy to answer these at a later date. There also might be the odd thing that I don't know. I'm also very happy to find out information for you and to pass that back to you as well. So.
All right, great. Thank you, Lisa. As Lisa said, now is time for questions, so you can enter those into your question panel in your GoToWebinar box. We do have a couple to start. So you had mentioned at the beginning management of change and techniques for that. Can you suggest some specific resources in terms of change management?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of things as well. I don't know if anyone has come across the change curve or the grief curve or the transition curve. It's all based on some work by somebody called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Erin, if I write that, can I write that so that everyone can see the name to all participants? Or if I write it to you, can you repeat it for me?
Yeah, so or if you use the chat box and turn your to send to an entire audience, that would go through to everyone.
I can't see an entire audience, Erin. That's my only problem.
That's okay. Yeah, we can send that out when we send out the recording.
Oh, okay, lovely, thank you. Anyway, she's called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she originally did some work around terminally ill patients and their reaction to what was happening to them, so very much around grief. And one of the things that they have noticed is that when people are going through a change management process, they are grieving the change. And so she has some things that are interesting to think about, because you can have a look at the various different stages of grief and and change, and they often come to start with things like shock, denial, anger, and then we go through to acceptance. It's definitely a curve. But what's really interesting is, particularly in a work scenario, when you're thinking about change, you can see what sort of behaviours people exhibit in those various different stages. So that's quite useful as well. There's also there's quite a nice tool that's about building resilience and some researchers at the University of Manchester, and they have a website that's called Robertson Cooper, and that's two different researchers. I think it's Ivan Robertson and Carey Cooper, and they talk about having a reservoir of well-being, and how various different things will drain your reservoir, and they talk about ways of building that back up, and both of those things can be really useful to read if you're thinking about change management and stuff. The other thing that I have as well is I have a handout that I could give you, that is for helping to lead through change. That might be something useful that I can provide the organisers, and then they can give to you. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that would be great. I think our attendees would love that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so the next question then is, what type of projects are suitable for the project management tools you mentioned? Are they most applicable for large projects, or would you also use them for smaller, shorter term projects?
It's quite interesting, this question, because actually I wrote a case study for Barbara Allen for her book. Now it makes me sound like I was just bigging my own case study up, doesn't it? But actually, one of the things that we talked about was the fact that obviously some things aren't that big. Now, I think if you're going to use some of the methodologies that I was talking about completely, we are talking about quite large and complicated projects. One of the things I found, though, is that learning about projects has helped me almost like cherry pick the smaller items that would be really good for smaller projects. So if you see what I mean, I do think you don't necessarily need the whole range if you're doing simpler projects, but I do think you can pick and choose some of the items that would be useful for them. And one of the things I talk about in the case study is how I use certain things to help me with my projects, and because running a conference that I did for such a long time, and also the fact that I have clients, and I suppose every piece of work I do is like a small project. I'm the leader, I'm the project manager, and I'm the team worker, but it has definitely got to have a deliverable at the end of it. And I know that some of the things that really helped me are some of the things around time management and making sure I've asked the right questions and I've got the right people involved can be really useful. So I think it's about having a look at those bigger ones, and if you have got some bigger methodologies for the complicated projects, and if you have got simpler projects, having a look and seeing which bits fit with your workflow and which will be really useful for those smaller ones as well.
Okay, great, thank you. And I just wanted to make a note, I have seen a couple of the attendees actually raise their hand in GoTo. We don't utilize that functionality for these webinars, so if you did have something to say or a question, do make sure that you type it into the question box instead. And so the next question we have is that, do you have any suggestions on implementing these strategies if we're at an institution that doesn't have a history of using any kind of project management plan?
Oh, gosh. That sounds tricky. This is going to, do you know, my initial reaction, and bearing in mind this is off the top of my head and it makes me sound incredibly underhand, I was going to say don't call it project management, but still use all of the tools. Is that dreadful? One of the things I would say is that I'd make the business case for project management as well, though, to be fair. That's a much better answer, sorry. Because actually, all the project management doing realistically is helping you to be organised. And although they might not have a history of project management and using project management tools, I'm sure they want projects to be successful and be organised. So I think that might be the way forward. I think as well, just thinking about it in a very slowly kind of way. I think basically thinking about showing them project management cycle, because if you think about starting, planning, implementing and closing, that's incredibly reasonable and rational. You know, there's not much to argue with there, I don't think, as well. So I think talking to them about how actually planning those stages would be useful. might be helpful if you're trying to get buy-in there as well. It might also be about thinking about, well, is there anybody that you think might be a champion for you as well, and seeing if they can see the use, and that might be helpful as well. But I think it's a bit of a tricky one. But I think as well, there are ways of doing it. I think you could, like I say, go for the softly approach and the smaller, more simple projects first, and then show them how successful that's been, and then go up to slightly more complicated stuff. Because I think if you went straight with something quite large, it might be quite overwhelming for them.
All right, thank you. And the next question is, what are the key skills and abilities of an effective project manager?
Ah, that's nice. I think in some ways, a lot of the key skills are the people skills that managers have. But I think as well as that, I think some of the things that you need to be able to be aware of, I think you need to be somebody that sees bigger picture and can see strategic ideas coming, and that can also make sure they're really up to date so that they can think about possible risks. I think sometimes projects fail because risks haven't been foreseen, and sometimes they could actually have been fairly obvious. So I think there's something around making sure you are aware of, I know it sounds daft, but aware of the news, aware of the political arena that your organisation is working at. You know, what kind of things affect your industry depending on where your library is based. And then also thinking about the fact that your staff need to be happy to be productive, so they need a good sense of purpose, and so they need somebody that can explain well but also can enthuse people. So there are quite a few different skills to thinking about project management. There's the technical stuff and the current awareness stuff, you know, problem solving, and then there's also the motivating people and managing change as well.
All right, thank you. The next one is, for large projects, do you suggest that the project manager fulfill that role alone, or is it okay to have people working and doing the groundwork on a project also be on the project management team?
I think it absolutely depends on the project. It depends on the size of it and how complicated it is. Because I know we've had people that job shared. Simply they were sharing the role because they weren't working. I was going to say as an FTE. I don't know if that's a term that translates. So they weren't working full time basically. So there was a job share. I had experience of a job share project management role, and that was fine as well. And it also depends what kind of skills are needed, I think. So I think as well, if you think, and we're going to talk a little bit about roles and things tomorrow, but I think it depends how large the project is and whether you've got a project board as well as a project sponsor. And I think, you know, you could have you know, team workers on the project board, and that might help with that as well. So I'm afraid that's a bit of a flaky answer. I'm afraid it kind of depends on how much work there is to do, I think.
Okay, no, that was helpful. Thank you. And then we do have one more question that's come in, so this will be our last one. And this attendee says that they work at a place that has annual goals and objectives, but they never get to identifying and planning projects. Do you have any suggestions for moving to that next step?
Okay. I suppose, sorry, I was just wondering, I suppose it depends a little bit on what's the reason for not getting to the projects. Because I know I once worked at an organisation where I was a solo librarian, and I had, well, it sounded like a quarter of a library assistant in the end, and I always used to joke it was from the knees down. And one of the things there was that I never got to any projects because I simply had to take work off her and I had to do the day-to-day stuff. I suppose it it depends on whether it's that or whether it's a different reason for not going for the projects. You know, is it simply that it could be a person that doesn't see or doesn't get excited by innovation and new products and that sort of thing? In that situation, that can be quite tough. And one of the things I might do is think about, well, what are the competitors doing? And I know in libraries it's not exactly a competition, but have you got a local library that does a similar thing to you that is more project oriented? Have they seen great benefits? What kind of things, you know, have they got more patrons coming in? Have they got more visits to the website? That sort of thing. So it's almost like, can you do a bit of a knowledge check of the organizations near you so that you can almost create your own business case for projects for your boss, basically? And it might well be thinking about something that's a quick win to start with, so that they're not used to doing projects, then you manage to persuade them to do a project, but it's also something that's successful. So again, I know that's quite a bit of quite a lot of different answers there, I realize, within that one answer. So
no, that was great. That's very helpful. Thank you. And thank you again, Lisa. So this will conclude our presentation today. If we did not get to your question, our presenters will send the answers in writing, and as Lisa said, we'll send out that list that she had mentioned at the beginning of the questions. And you will soon receive a short online evaluation form. So if you could please take a few minutes to respond to those questions. Your comments are very valuable and do help ALCTS plan future events, including these virtual pre-conferences. The email will also include links to today's slides and recording, and you now have the opportunity to receive a certificate attendance, and all of that information will be included in the email. Thanks once again to our presenter, Lisa Jenkins, and to members of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee, the ALCTS Office, and to the ALCTS Program Committee. ALCTS does have two pre-conference events taking place at ALA Annual on June 21st, which they're see right now on your screen. Please see the website for more details on these and to register. And once again, thank you all for joining us. We do hope that you'll be joining us tomorrow for part 2 of this virtual pre-conference on Project Management 101, and this will conclude today's session.
Thank you, everyone.